Filed this under, I didn't really see this one coming. Turns out a majority of Democratic primary voters in Texas and California prefer socialism. Wow. Now, this is according to a CBS News YouGov tracking poll that was released on Sunday. The survey, as you can see on the screen, showed 56% of Democratic primary voters in Texas and 57% in California now have a favorable view of socialism. Just 37% of Democratic voters in Texas and 45% in California, I'm actually surprised at the California numbers. I thought it'd be switched, now have a positive view of capitalism. So, okay. Now, look, caveats galore, right? These two things aren't exactly defined. What is capitalism? What is socialism? What does that even mean, right? Socialism has not been defined correctly for decades. Okay, honestly, right? What it is, the dictionary definition of socialism is public ownership of the means of production, right? That's what socialism actually is. Now, what it actually is and what it actually gets used as or defined in the American lexicon is basically anything that remotely helps the American people is basically socialism at this point, right? Things like public education and universal healthcare, right? Socialism, right? And look, when it comes to conservatives, they think everything is socialism. They think a higher minimum wage is socialism, right? So, like the definitions are very, very loose, right? But the important takeaway from this is the numbers on capitalism. And I really want to focus on that one because it means that a majority of Democratic primary voters in Texas and California are unhappy with the system the way that it is. And by the way, nobody blames them, right? I'm unhappy the way the system is. And look, while socialism hasn't been well defined, people do know capitalism, or at least the American version of capitalism, which is heavily tilted towards the rich and corporations. Now, the capitalism that we know is when your EpiPen skyrocketed in price and now costs $600 for a pack of 2, when it literally takes about $1 to produce. Capitalism, right? Capitalism is when your insurance company rips you off because it decides not to cover a medication or a procedure and ends up charging you with the bill. That's capitalism, right? Or when you go to a doctor that is not covered in your insurance network, right? And you end up getting the bill. Well, a gigantic bill. Or even if you're in network and you get operated on or seen by a doctor that isn't in your network and you get a gigantic bill, well, that's the capitalism that we know, right? It's when Jeff Bezos, the richest man alive, pays less in taxes than you do. Capitalism is when your boss makes over 1,000 times more than you off of the labor that you put in. It's when the banks fail after making giant predatory loans, getting bailed out while you end up losing your home. You don't get a bailout. That is the capitalism that we know here in America, where there's an egregious amount of wealth at the top and everyone else is struggling just to make ends meet with 2 or maybe 3 jobs. With that system in place, does anybody blame anyone for being very unhappy with capitalism? And by the way, one of the big things that has helped make socialism a more acceptable word, especially among young people, is Bernie Sanders, who describes himself as a democratic socialist, right? Now, make no mistake, Bernie Sanders is a capitalist. We know this, right? He believes in capitalism, but it's the Nordic model of capitalism. It's high taxes on the wealthy, private property, right? Private ownership of property, but public healthcare, public education. It is a mix of socialism and capitalism. It is a mixed market system. You have high taxes on the wealthy and corporations used to fund a very robust public support system. That is democratic socialism, right? And that is the Nordic model. That is what Bernie Sanders is trying to bring to America. He's not trying to take over the means of production. So part of that, by the way, model includes free healthcare at the point of service, tuition-free college, housing programs, higher wages, etc. Those are programs that work because they're cheaper, more efficient, and so they do work, and people know that they work. And by the way, for conservatives again deride everything that helps regular people as socialism for a very long time. Why? Look, in America, the history of Medicare and Social Security have been called socialism by Republicans. You know, the most popular programs among conservatives, Medicare and Social Security. So, but hey, there was a time where they called it socialism. And so that's where conservatives are. And they don't really make sense. They don't. And so, by the way, that same survey showed Bernie Sanders leading in the primary field in both Texas and California, which will award a combined 643 pledged delegates on Tuesday. So, again, Bernie Sanders helping this out. People unhappy with capitalism are going for Bernie Sanders, which makes a lot of sense. So now, what actual socialists think about this? Bhaskar Sankara, published of the socialist magazine Jacobin, says this, quote, I care more about advancing class struggle and a political program that can help working people than how an undefined socialism and capitalism polls. But this is still an absolutely remarkable development. So that's a socialist. Now, CBS News, however, reports that while Sanders has come under criticism from opponents because he identifies as Democratic Socialist, majorities of Democratic primary voters in California and Texas have at least a somewhat favorable view of socialism and is viewed more positively than capitalism. And, of course, let's see. Crystal Ball, by the way. I love Crystal's reporting, right? She said, quote, did not see those Texas numbers on socialism coming. And finally, researcher Kadira Petyagoda says that Texas voters' relatively positive view of socialism is no surprise. For those of us who have long highlighted the history of economic left-wing politics and rural areas, the original populism. So overall, I think the best takeaway here is people are tired of the system and they're angry and they want change. By the way, in South Carolina, exit polls found that 2/3 of white voters wanted fundamental change in Washington. While you had older conservative black voters, which make up a majority of voters in South Carolina, preferring to move to an Obama type system or to return to the Obama years, right? The Obama years, unfortunately, helped to create people like Donald Trump. And by the way, going back to Obama, I remember when he ran for president on Hope and Change. Joe Biden says no change. And by the way, he promised his donors, nothing will fundamentally change under me. So, but it is fascinating, though. And I also am surprised at these numbers. But one thing California and Texas do have in common, and I guess it shouldn't be a surprise, is young Latino voters who are massively in favor of Bernie Sanders. They took him to victory in Nevada, and it's because they're progressive. And now we're seeing their influence, of course, in California and Texas, which have a lot of delegates and have Bernie Sanders up by a lot. So, look, these are encouraging numbers. It's a fascinating poll. And even if it's not as well defined, it just shows that there are a lot of people that make up the core base of the Democratic Party that are looking for change. And it does explain why Bernie Sanders has a very good chance of winning. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a patreon.com/TYTNation set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.